So hello everyone and welcome to the commentary for the commentary on Tribalstack Tropics, where I'll be going over a few of the key points that have been mentioned in the commentary, and I'm trying to give you a little bit of a different perspective and some more insight into some of the stuff that has been said, as well as my personal opinions, of course. Let's go right in.
So I'm Laylee, I'm community lead at Playtonic, and you're getting the Plague edition of me at the moment, as you can probably hear. I have with me Gavin Price,
Hello.
Studio Head, Hamish Lockwood.
Hello.
Shout out to Hamish Lockwood.
Asking it like
Slash
questions.
artist.
And Stephen Hurst, environment artist.
Hello again.
Correct, yeah,
The frame rate killer.
Oh yeah, by the way, I'll be jumping around
so yeah, we're going to
a
do
lot.
a playthrough of the first
get to
half
the key
of
points.
Tribalstack.
I don't know if everyone noticed at the start of every world, to make your initial progress, we forced a move that Trousers just given you for free onto you to access the remainder of the world. So we've just got the roll move from Trouser back in the old Ivory Towers. And
So I have actually mentioned this on my own video series. So I've made a video series right after the game came out where I took like an hour to talk about each individual level in the game and just give my personal thoughts about the level design. And this is actually something that I brought up as well on pretty much every single level, that each level starts off on some location that is a bit outside of the level, and from that location you sort of look towards the level, and it forces you, well, it tries to force you to use the move that you've just learned. As a speedrunner, you don't really need to do that anywhere, but the game is sort of at least trying to tell you, okay, this is the move that you've just learned. Remember to use this move because it's gonna come in handy in this world. So it basically makes sure that you remember that you have the move, and it also puts you on some location where, because you look from an outside location towards the world, it's easier to orient yourself than if, imagine, you started off directly in the center of the world and then you have like a 360 degrees something happening all over the place. It would be very disorienting. So the fact that you start somewhere different, like on the outskirts, looking into the center or towards the center, and it also forces you to use the move, that's some really good level design right there.
use it straight away to get up here, else we slide down. And that's the same for every. That's something consistent throughout the whole game, isn't it, Hamish?
Yes. I'm trying to think of what happened in the other worlds.
But yeah, all the moves gained, they get called into action straight away at the start of each level before you can go off and find Trouser to go in and give him some quills, because he's such a nice businessman. Why wouldn't you?
Have we had any speedrunners that have actually broken our rule? Or did we
Probably. I think you can clip through Shipwreck Creek and get taken to the end credits somewhere.
Ah,
Yeah.
Okay, that's not quite correct, but almost. I can tell you, as someone who has run the game before, that you can clip out of bounds right outside the tome for Tribalstack Tropics in Ivory Towers before even going into the first world for the first time. Like as soon as you get there, you can clip out of bounds, and then you can make your way all the way to the waterworks out of bounds, because there's a link from the first area of Ivory Towers to the waterworks. Then from waterworks you can skip past the World 3 area as well and go all the way to the cliff section of Ivory Towers, and then with yet another out of bounds you can actually go all the way to the final boss of the game and beat the game without any moves, without any pages, whatever. And that is actually the any percent route for this game, and I think I've already put probably some gameplay of that somewhere on the screen, so you can take a look at that. And like, I'm not making this up, this is actually what you can do. I know that Hamish Lockwood was in my streams sometimes when I was doing challenge runs. Now, they were challenge runs and not speed runs, so I don't know how much he knows about the actual speed run about this, but I do think that a lot of the stuff in the speedrun is known to at least some parts of the developers.
let's just expand it a little bit.
I remember we always wanted the first world to be kind of this return to blue sky, lush greenery, gaming, the temple theme.
It was always a call out to our older games, because I mean, a lot of the games like DK or Banjo generally started with a jungle level, so it was more of a call out to the fans, really. To say this, this is where we came from.
In hindsight, I know we gave ourselves massive technical challenges, creating such an open level with lots of open wide views in every direction.
Yes, you did.
Foolishly, we thought we could just do things like that willy-nilly, and the technical wizards would wave their magic wands. But it doesn't quite work like that in game development, really, and it never has it. I don't think. So
above the law.
Lesson learned is what we'd say, and I don't think we'd try and give ourselves so much openness. And it is difficult to keep so many open areas unique and distinctive and interesting. And in hindsight, I think we've already got some thoughts on how we'd do things differently second time around. In this episode, I'll try not to.
Okay, this is also something that I find very interesting, because when I also talked to a lot of other people, like I was quite active in my circle of friends when this game came out, and I like talked to other people about what they thought about the game, and I also talked about this a lot on my stream. And something that came up, especially in this first world, is that even though the stuff that you're looking at in a vacuum looks pretty good, it looks pretty good. Like I said, like vibrant colors, for example, and I like the art style as well. When you see characters standing around, like Trouser, for example. Trouser is a really cool guy. He fits into that spot where he's standing. I like the way it looks, but when you walk around and you see all these different areas that are in this level, you have, for example, what you can see in the back right now. It's a bit blurry right now.
That's it.
But you can see in the back you have the temple that leads up to Rampo later, and then you have the temple in the center. And apart from the way they are physically built, like just the way they are, how would you describe it? Like they are quite similar in that they're both built of what would be in universe, the same material, the same everything. They just are structurally built a little bit differently. Like they're two different iterations of the same temple. I think this is how you would say it. And there could have been maybe something used to make them more visually distinct, other than from a distance you can see that one of them is a bit bigger and a bit more open, while the other is a bit smaller and condensed. But I think it's really good that this was actually mentioned here, because it seemed like this sort of sentiment did indeed come up with the developers as well, apparently. That maybe, for example, you could have the Rampart Temple, just make it differently colored. Just make it differently colored, whatever. It's a red temple or whatever. Like make it completely stand out, and not stand out so that it, like when you walk into the stage you immediately get glued to it, but at least that when you see that Rampart Temple and then the center temple next to each other, you can immediately see that there's very big differences between the two, and you can instantly say, babe, that's Rampart Temple, bam, that's the center temple, and you've got this visual distinction between everything. Because right now, especially when you also walk around the outside of the stage, this is something where I don't think this doesn't come up in this episode, but the outside of the stage is, well, in older games you just had some weird low poly wall or whatever that was pretty indistinct, and it just extended everywhere up into the sky, and you didn't question it. But the thing is, when you amp up the graphics, if you just put a wall at the edge of every stage, it would look extremely weird and out of place. I don't think you can do that unless you like somehow weave it into the world somehow, like Hat in Time has Subcon Forest, where it's like a really deep and dense forest where everything is really dark and sinister, and because it's so deep and dense, I can kind of see that at the edge of it it's just some nondescript wall of trees or whatever that you can't get past. I can get behind that. But if you have a more open stage like this, where that also has a bit of verticality to it, like you can get pretty high in this stage. If there was no wall around the outer edge, which there isn't in the game, or as I was trying to say, if it did have a wall rather, it would be really weird, because you have so much verticality. You just jump over the wall, make it an invisible wall? No, you can't do that. Can't make it an invisible wall. Can't make it extend all the way into the sky. That would be really weird. So because you have the verticality involved in this game, you can't just put like random walls at the edge of a stage like this, so it needs to be open. However, as I was saying earlier, if they walk around the outside of the stage, you just see a lot of like protruding rocks everywhere, and all the rocks look very samey, but you can walk around them, so sometimes you think to yourself, maybe there is something there. And this is something that pretty much everyone who played this game did when they had like a handful of quills left to find, is they went around the outside of the stage and climbed on all these different weird rocks. Is that really the solution that we're going to go for? That players are going to just climb around these outside rocks all the time? Because visually, they look quite similar to everything else you see in the stage. And I think this is also another point. Maybe it could have been visually more obvious that these rocks are on the outside of the stage are not really part of the stage. They're supposed to be kind of like walls or something that says, okay, here's where the stage ends. They're not part of the stage, not supposed to be. But this comes into is like part of another issue that I'm gonna get to later as well, when the conversation goes towards the quill placement. So I'm gonna put that on hold for now, but remember that I was talking about this, about the outside edges and people walking around these rocks all over the place trying to find that. But yeah, in general, I think it's good that this has been identified, that maybe it could have been more. I don't know if this is exactly what they meant, but I hope this is what they meant, that a lot of the stuff in this stage, or in some other stages as well, don't visually tell you exactly and immediately, first off, what makes all the different areas and buildings in a stage distinct from another. I think stage 4 does this really well in Casino, where everything that you see, every little building, if you can even call it that, is visually very distinct from each other, highly distinct, but not quite as much in here. And also just areas in general where you might see something and not quite sure also what the gameplay implications are here. So, for example, you see the rocks in the I don't know if you can see your mouse, on the top left of the screen right now, they have this rock formation. I've seen players try to climb up their rock formation from different angles, because maybe there's something on the way up there. There actually are some quills up there over where the stage begins, like atop the stage entrance, there are actually some quills up there. So people act like everything they can see is part of the world to like jump around and find stuff in. Of course, it's part of the world as in you can go there and you can explore, you could jump around there, but this is what I want to get to. People are not sure if there isn't an important collectible there, and maybe some more visual guidance could have been used to signify to the player, you can go there, but you probably don't need to. And this is also I'm gonna come back later to when we get to the quills. So yeah, when we get to the quills, I'm gonna talk a bit more about that. But for now, like I said, I hope that this is indeed what they identified, first off, visual distinction, and also making sure that it makes sense to see what areas are important for the gameplay, which ones are not. Let's continue.
Games that may or may not be in development, or time them for release straight after the video ends.
Yeah, we actually had a question from one of our Facebook followers called Grant Martinson, and he asked regarding the design level. He said, did you originally have this level designed with verticality in mind? The other levels get wider after expanding, but this one gets higher.
We always wanted the expansion on this level. We thought, well, we can't go any bigger and more horizontal, so we wanted something, a big key feature that when you came back and saw the first...
Just a very quick thing, they said they can't go any bigger horizontally. Now, some people might listen to that and think, oh, why could you not go bigger as vertical? I know, horizontally, I know you can do it. Mario Odyssey has like really big sprawling levels, why can't you do that in here? No, it's actually really good. It's actually really good that it was perfectly identified here that you don't want to be bigger on a horizontal level in this kind of game. You can say, because Mario Odyssey is quite a different game. I don't want to try to compare the two, because there are some really big differences in the way that either of those games just handle the core gameplay. Like there's different or quite different approaches to core gameplay between the two, so I don't want to try and like compare the two. But for this kind of game that Yooka-Laylee is trying to be, I don't like these freeze frames. For this kind of game that Yooka-Laylee is trying to be, which is more like in line of Banjo-Kazooie, maybe a little bit of Donkey Kong 64, maybe some Banjo-Tooie in there. Maybe if you go in that direction, I think this sort of size that you have like horizontally, just how far you can go from left to right in any direction, this is totally fine. You might even argue maybe it's a bit too much. Maybe it's a bit too much. You can cut off some parts here and there. But I do think it's really good that it was identified that we do not want to go any bigger on a horizontal level.
You thought, wow, the levels gained this massive, huge, significant feature. Going vertical after there's already so much horizontal on level seemed a natural thing to do.
It's also a nice thing to catch your eye from a distance and say, oh, that's clearly new.
It is, yeah.
To the level.
And when we were trying
also, very important right here, he said that it's something that catches your eye. This is also something that I talk about a lot during my video series, where I always talk about, well, if you go into a stage and you just stand somewhere and you just look around, what do you see? What catches your eye? Because this is something that is extremely important to getting a good flow of character movement through a stage on your very first playthrough. If you don't know that much about the stage, it's your very first time playing the game, very first time in that stage, what guides you through the stage? What makes you walk from point A to point B? The first thing is probably going to be what looks the most intriguing in a distance. Like, imagine you come into a stage and you see this massive building in the distance that has all sorts of stuff on it, that has some cool visual design on it. Like, this is instantly gonna catch your eye. Your eyes are gonna get magnetized to it. And you might think to yourself, maybe I want to explore some of the areas around, but you know you're gonna be going towards that, and you want to go towards that. This is what I'm talking about. Not just, of course, you're gonna go to every single part of the stage, but when you see something this intriguing, you want to go through it. And this want is very important, because there's a difference between going into a stage and being like, well, I guess I'm gonna go everywhere because I need to collect everything, and the difference between that and I wanna go on that tower. There's a really big difference between the two, because on one hand, one is you're just ticking off checkboxes, but the other is pure excitement. And this is why having stuff that visually catches your eye is very important. Now, I was talking earlier, this is the first thing that makes people go or want to go somewhere. The second thing would be collectibles. You always want to go to where collectibles are, and this is also something that I'm going to come back to later once the conversation goes towards the quill placement as well. But for now, I do find it very good that it was indeed identified correctly that we need something, especially on something like an expansion, where you come into a stage for the second time, that you get something that catches your eye and instantly tells you there's something new where you want to go to. You want to go to that place. Why? Because it's new. You haven't seen this before. Nice. Like that.
Anticipate how players might want to go through the game. Do they play all the way through? Do they go do a level, expand a level, then go do the next level? Or do they do a mix, an ad hoc mix, and shoot from the hip with their Woody Duo adventure? But I always, where am I going with this one?
It's something like a box of blurb or something
That's
like
it.
that.
No, we wanted to make sure, the gameplay was going to be significantly different when changed, so we could access to things like car toss when coming back to this one.
Okay,
so
this is also something that I brought up as well in my video. I'm going to keep saying this, but I also talked about how what's really important for the expansions, and what I hoped was going to happen a lot more with all the other stages, because when you just look at what he just said right there, he said, oh, it needs to be different on a gameplay perspective as well. This is exactly what an expansion or what people would think an expansion should do to a stage, or what people would really want from it. Is what I would think, at least, what people would want from an expansion. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I would assume that the goal here would be to make sure that when you come into the stage a second time, it's not just, okay, here's the stage, but you have a bit more to it. Like, because that would be a little bit kind of like just some random add-on DLC where it's like, well, we give you 60% of the content now, and the other 40% of the content you get later at some other point. I find it a lot more interesting when instead it's like, okay, we give you some content, and then with the expansion, you still kind of have the same content, but now stuff is different. Now, for example, you have the river that goes around Tribalstack Tropics. First off, you of course have just the empty dry riverbed, but now with the expansion, you can fill it with water, and then you can freeze it. Like, the stuff that's already there suddenly changes in a way that makes the stage feel new and fresh again. Suddenly everything you knew about the stage, throw that out the window, or maybe not everything, but throw parts of it out the window, because now we're gonna like reshape the way you thought about this stage, and we're also gonna create different types of gameplay now. Like, maybe before, kind of like in this stage, you would just be going from point A to point B on the ground. You would just be rolling all over the place, like rolling around the center temple, branching off into different places. But with the expansion, now you're climbing a tower. That's different gameplay. Now we've suddenly introduced different gameplay, other than just saying, well, here's like there's a new island that floats on the other side of the world now, and it has like another third temple in it. I think that would have been the worst thing to just do. Just like, here's a third temple. It's exactly the same as Rampart Temple. It's just a bit more content, So it's good that this was not what happened, and instead there is different types of gameplay. Now, sadly, I think the first stage is the only stage that actually delivered on that. Fifth stage kind of did something like that as well, although fifth stage before expansion is almost nothing, which is alright, I don't mind that. But at least for the other stages, I was really hoping that the expansion would, as was mentioned right here, add different types of gameplay challenges to the stage and would fundamentally change it, because sadly the expansions of stage 2, 3 and 4, in my opinion, they really just do feel like, well, here's a little bit more content. You can argue that maybe in stage 4, for example, some of the like the pachinko machines turn on, and that's a little bit of different gameplay, and I agree, that's fun, that's interesting, but apart from that, I just didn't feel like that did enough to shape to like change the way you felt about the base stage, because the basic stage that you have is still exactly the same, and nothing that you do in the expansion areas has any sort of link to the actual stage. And this is the important part that I'm going to get to now. This is like the pointe of the entire thing. The expansion parts of stage 4, for example, could have just been their own stage. They could have just been their own stage. It didn't really do anything to the base stage. Like, okay, maybe there's this one, or is there though? Like, this is one part where, doesn't it open up the wall that you can then fly into by bombing the wall in front of it? If someone remembers what I mean with the transformation. But even then, you could just put the stuff that's behind the wall in its own stage, and the only thing you're missing is you're bombing a wall now. I don't know. But in this stage you can't really do that, because you are interfering with the water, like you're putting the water into the waterbed, you're interfering with the base stage that is there. So you couldn't put that in its own stage, because the riverbed is part of the stage, and you're interacting with that. And I was hoping that the other stages would kind of be more like this, but I think that, I don't know if this was is said, I don't remember everything that was in this video, but I think this also comes up in some degree later on as well, that someone did indeed say that they learned some lessons from the expansions. I'm not quite sure if this was part of this or if I just imagined that, but I hope indeed that this was indeed something where it's a new thing. We haven't really seen it really in any big game, so it was something that could have gone wrong, and in some places I would argue it kind of didn't quite deliver. But now that we've made that experience and we've learned from that, we have grown as people, as developers, and now when we make new games, we can say, oh, remember the lessons that we've learned from expansions? We shouldn't just add a bit more content that could just be its own level. Let's make sure that all the stuff that we add actually changes the basics of the stage that we have, so that players, when they go into it, even though the stage that they would be looking at might just be mostly the same, and maybe most of the stuff is also the same, but there will be parts in that stage that are going to be completely switched up in the way that you think about them. And there's going to be new gameplay changes in the stage, in all of these different places around the stage that you've already been to before, but now you can revisit them and do cool new stuff there. I hope that is something that is going to be flowing into, hopefully, some future game.
Mixture of differences in expansions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Each world we did try and make it different, the expansion different from the last one, which I guess we'll talk about in each episode. But
and of course, they did say here that each expansion is supposed to be a little bit different. Now, I think the way they indeed did that is more like some of the ideas behind the expansions different. Like, for example, in this stage, it's like we add more verticality to it. In the second stage, it's we open up the castle in the middle, and that's all that stage, all the expansion does. And then the third stage is we add another island to it, because now I think you start with 3 islands and then you get 4 islands. But the thing is, even though they're all different ideas, what all of these ideas just do is, here's a bit more content. And this is what I was talking about before. I'm not going to go into this deep more, but this is what I mean in that this is something new, and I think the ideas behind it are totally fine. I do like that they say, okay, we wanted to make sure that every expansion feels a bit different. I do like that. But I don't think that just making it like it unlocks a different type of new content is really what should have been the difference. The difference should have been how it impacts the gameplay on the base stage after the expansion. That impact could have been different from all the stages. I might say this just very quickly. On stage 4, I had this idea for an expansion where maybe there's some parts of the stage that don't have any power, and then when you expand the stage, you unlock a power generator. That's all that the expansion does. It unlocks a power generator. But when you interact with the generator, some parts of the stage now have power, but there are some puzzles and some areas that require you to flick the power off and on. Like maybe you want to turn a rotor to a specific spot and then turn the power off, move through, and then turn the power on again so that the rotor like pushes you, as you would do a rotor when it rotates, pushes wind, like it pushes you upwards or something. So that you like create new puzzles based on like turning power on and off. Like maybe something that could have been something there, but the rotor would always have been there in the base stage. Maybe there's a collectibles that are scattered on top of the rotor where you would go onto the rotor blades and you would like collect some like quills, and then when you come back later you're like, oh my god, now I can turn on the rotor, amazing. That's the kind of stuff I was talking about. But yeah, let's continue.
I remember saying that.
Yeah,
they were just open doors.
Look at that. Butterflies. They can be used to top up health and special move energy depending on how you collect them. That's because we wanted to reduce the faff around it. But now looking back at that, you know what? We were pretty divisive, weren't we, on the energy meter mechanic, and we just think actually, should we just let people carry on using their special abilities forever? Should we even need a meter? And you know what? I don't think there's a wrong answer to that. You can just make your bed and go with it. But
I know when I play, I put on the tonic, it gives me extra. I think it doubles it, or.
Okay, this is another interesting part. Oh, I can get a freeze frame. It isn't blurred. Come on. Okay. So the energy meter is indeed something that, if I was forced to comment about it, well, not forced right now, but I'm gonna comment on it anyway, it is indeed something where you ask yourself, well, how much is it needed? How much isn't it needed? And I think to answer any of that, we need to go back to the beginning of what probably led to the inclusion of the energy meter. Now, I think personally what probably led to this is the idea that, like was also mentioned, you don't want to faff about with so many different collectibles. For example, you had the golden feathers or the red feathers in Banjo-Kazooie that allowed you to use the invincibility or allowed you to use the flight. And the idea was, maybe we want to focus more on collecting more key parts of the collectibles, like pages and quills. Maybe we want to focus more on that. Maybe we want to put a few more enemies in there. I don't know. Maybe we want to focus more on other parts of the gameplay that isn't just running around and collecting these items. So the question at this point is that something we need to even consider? Maybe that's not even a problem. Maybe it's totally fine that the player has to go around and get some red feathers and gold feathers every now and then. So you ask yourself that. Next step, you then ask yourself, okay, if we do want to do something about this problem, then what do we do? And the first thing that would come to mind, and it's not a bad idea in itself, is you just say, well, you put something like a cooldown on these moves. Like let's say, for example, you had the Wonder Wing for Banjo-Kazooie. Let's just use that as a specific example. Let's say you would do that in Banjo-Kazooie. If you use the Wonder Wing, you can maybe use it for 2 seconds, which is the invincibility, by the way, where you use golden feathers. Maybe let's say you can use that for 2 seconds, and then after you've used those 2 seconds of Wonder Wing, you would have to wait like 10 seconds or whatever until you can use it again. And then if you fly, let's say you can fly for like a minute or whatever at a time, and then after that you have to wait another minute until you can fly again. Maybe something like that was considered. And then you also consider, well, for example, the flying, we want to be able to do that at any point. We don't want to use flight pads. This is another question where you also ask yourself, well, is it really important that we remove flight pads, or maybe we want to keep them? There's a lot of questions here where you ask yourself something where it's not immediately obvious what the right answer is, and if there even is a right answer. Like, are flight pads good, or is it better to just be able to fly all the time? You can ask yourself that also in the sense of the in-universe logic. If Kazooie wants to fly, why does Kazooie need a flight pad? Why does Kazooie need a bit of metal on the ground to be able to do it? If Kazooie wants to do the high jump, I forgot what it was called, why do you need a metal plate on the ground? Can't Kazooie just do that all the time? That's a question that you also ask yourself that in universe. And so maybe you think to yourself, well, if you want to be able to do that all the time, which I think is also something that stems from, let's just do something different, let's do something new. Not because, it's not just that we think to ourselves, well, before it was perfect, but we really want to do something different. So even though it's already perfect, let's do something that's worse just for the sake of it being different. Because I don't think that saying that we can use these moves all the time is in itself a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing that you can, for example, always initiate a flight. That, for example, let's say, for example, the high jump again from Banjo-Kazooie, it wouldn't have to theoretically be bad if you could do it all the time, as long as the level design makes sure that that isn't overpowered. If the level design accommodates for that, it's totally fine if you could do it all the time. And in fact, to some degree, you can do it all the time in Banjo-Tooie, because when you split up and you run around with just Kazooie, Kazooie's high jump is really high. Kazooie's high jump is insanely high, actually. Especially if you like do it from a high spot and then you flutter around. That's really, you can go almost anywhere in the stage. If you just go to a high place and then do a high jump into flutter, you go pretty much anywhere. So, but the level design in Banjo-Tooie, it accommodated that. It made sure that it wasn't too overpowered if you could do that, and it did that in different ways. For example, in the 5th stage, the dinosaur stage. Oh my god, I played it just last month and I've already forgot it. Pterodactyl Land. In Pterodactyl Land, for example, there's a few, or almost all of the important challenges are behind doors. They're behind some sort of door, so even if you get really high and then fly around everywhere, you can't just immediately collect like 3 jiggies or whatever just because you're gonna be able to go everywhere. No, because all the important challenges are hidden behind doors. You go in that room, and then the room itself is balanced in such a way that even if you can jump high, it's not gonna do much for you. So that's a thing. Coming back to this, we then ask ourselves, okay, so we want to be able to do it all the time, and we want to make sure that the level design accommodates that, okay? Everything is good until this point. And then we also tell ourselves, okay, but if we have all of these different moves, and all these different moves have their own cooldown, isn't that really annoying if you would have to watch the cooldown for all these different abilities? Cooldown for sonar explosion, maybe cooldown for sonar shots, cooldown for flight, cooldown for maybe some sort of high jump, like I'm theorizing here. If you had like a super duper high jump that also had a cooldown, something like that. If you had a cooldown for all these different abilities, that would get really annoying to keep track of all of them. So instead, we have one bar of energy, and you can spend that energy to do stuff, and then the cooldown is just waiting for that energy to refill. The question is, of course, is that good? Is that bad? Well, it depends on how you implement it. And it's a good sign that it was mentioned in this commentary that there was some divisiveness about this, because this should be divisive, because this is a game mechanic that is not easy to implement. It could either be too powerful, suddenly the player is kind of what happens if you have a lot of energy, the player is just gonna fly everywhere. The player's gonna fly everywhere, then maybe like wait 2 seconds on the ground, he's gonna fly everywhere even longer. He doesn't care. Or maybe if you make it too short or the cooldown too long, then the player doesn't really feel like using that ability, or even worse, when they have used the ability, let's say they fly up somewhere and they drop down, and they say, okay, I'm climbing this tower, I've flown up halfway on the tower, now I want to fly the second half of the tower, but I need to wait for the flight to come back, and then they just sit there, cross their arms and go, well, I'm waiting for my flight to come back. That's not a good feeling. I think that's a really bad feeling if you're repeatedly having to wait for it, like standing around doing nothing. If you could do something, maybe like if you could do something to make it go faster, that would be different. In this case, you can get butterflies to refill it. Now, butterflies aren't particularly everywhere. They are only in select places. So let's say you fly up that tower, and on the place you land, there aren't any butterflies nearby. You're still waiting with your arms crossed. So that's a thing. So you see, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things you have to consider that goes into the design decision of, do we include the bar? How do we include it? How fast do we make it? How much does each little thing use? What can you do to refill the bar? There's a lot of questions being answered here, and requires a really amazing game developer to make sure that it is totally fine. Now, is it totally fine in this game? Not quite. I think there is rooms for improvement here. Is it bad? Definitely not. I think that the meter is fine if you learn to deal with it. Like, for example, when I did speedruns of the game, and people are going to be like, well, if you speedrun the game, of course you're going to get really good at it. And if you're really good at the game, then you don't mind some stuff like this because you can play around it. But even so, even during my very first initial playthrough of the game, once I got to like the second or the third stage level of the game, once I got to like a few hours into the game, I kind of got used to this. I kind of got used to, okay, I can roll for this amount of time, and I either want to make sure that I end my roll near a butterfly or near some enemies that I can fight, or maybe I want to jump around on some platforms. So I like roll from a platform challenge to the next platform challenge. And if I arrive at the next platform challenge and my energy is empty, it doesn't matter because I'm jumping. And I don't need energy when I'm jumping, so it doesn't matter that I'm out of energy. So I kind of got used to playing around with that, and then I didn't mind it. And I also didn't mind it too much with the flying, because I always knew exactly, okay, I want to go to this place from here, so I'm going to fly over there, and that's totally fine. And once I land, I want to do X, Y, and Z. So I always laid it out in my head what I want to do, and if you manage your energy, it's fine. But of course, not everyone plays like that, and I know that this is also something that I did when I was looking for that last quill. When I was always looking for the last few quills, I also just I just started flying, and I just circled the stage trying to look for places. And in that sort of scenario, it was also frustrating to me that I would start flying, I would start circling the stage, I would drop down, I didn't find anything, and then I would just wait with my arms crossed, and then I would start flying again. Then wait another bit, then start flying again. Because that's the problem if the bar just recharges by itself, is that you're always just waiting in between. That's not to say that you shouldn't have the option to wait, that you should have to collect butterflies, for example, because then you make butterflies too important to the game. If you make it like that, suddenly everything revolves around butterflies. People are gonna just look for butterflies all over the place, and they're not even gonna worry about the rest of the game. Suddenly the entire game is about butterflies. That is way overkill. You should not do that. You should be able to just get your energy back very easily without too many bells and whistles attached. So I could keep going on talking about this for like an hour, but I'm not gonna do that because I've already talked way too long about this. But I do want to mention it because it was just very quickly glossed over in this commentary. But this is like a really big topic. You can't, of course it's easy when you're like someone playing the game and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel nice, this is terrible, I removed the energy bar, I want the old system back. There's so much going on here that it's really hard to say that. That isn't to say that I think like I said, I don't think the system is perfect. I think the system definitely has room to improve. But because there's so many different things going on, I can't just sit here and be like, well, obviously all you needed to do was add this and then it would have been totally fine. It's not that simple. A lot of deliberate thought needs to go into this. And to come back to my initial point, it is very good that this point was indeed divisive around the developers, because this is not something easy to do. And I hope that going into the future, maybe the one thing that I would say about this is, and something that I also said during some of my reviews and video series on the level design for this, is maybe more external testing needs to be done. I don't know if there was external testing done at all, or how much external testing. So external testing is when you like get people from outside the company to test your game. I think it was probably done. I assume it was done, because the thing is, if you just have people in your company testing all the time, then people are gonna get used to stuff. For example, Cardos sections. If you play Cardos sections over and over and over again, you get used to the controls. And once you get used to the controls, you don't notice if something is wrong. And I'm gonna come back to this later, because we are gonna talk about Cardos in this video as well. But for now, maybe more external testing needs to be done, because maybe external testers would have been able to identify exactly what feels off. Because the energy bar, like I said earlier, if you get used to it, you don't notice some of the shortcomings of it too much. You don't notice that some players spend most of their time waiting because they feel like they have to fly all the time. So they spend half the game time just waiting, which is really bad. So maybe something like that needs to be considered. But this tangent has been on for way too long. Let's just continue.
Extra bit of meter, so
Yeah.
I do appreciate more meter.
Yeah. Maybe we shouldn't do it in any future iteration.
So it did solve the problem of, to an extent, of having lots of different collectibles that do all the different moves, like in the old games.
Yeah, I was quite happy with that. Final decision, the reason behind it. Oops.
Embarrassing.
I was just checking that this was still here. It is. T-Muck. Yeah, collected enough quills to go see our old friend.
Trouser.
Good old Trouser.
Bless you.
Let's go and give Twitco some money. come on, all this text. Come on, Andy.
Okay, he starts mashing the text here to skip through it. He's obviously not reading it because, of course, he's played the game so many times, and we all know what Trouser says. There's a button that skips text. You patched this in. You should know this. Yeah, just a little quick.
I could have said that in 5 words. Do you want move? Yes. No. I think that one is. It comes down to budget, actually. So I'd love to do that kind of stuff. I think it makes a huge difference. And I don't think. I think I'm not sure how people understand game development budgets.
Yeah.
Really, but that money on Kickstarter, only once we wanted to make sure we'd got enough and we weren't having to bank game sales to fund physical item productions and everything. So that all came out of our Kickstarter budget. We lost money to taxes, credit card companies, and Kickstarter's cut, etc. So I think from the original £2 million raised, the game budget actually ended up something around the £1.3 million mark. So it's quite a lot, and
which does sound like a lot on the face of it.
Yeah,
but
and I'm not even making an excuse or blowing our own trumpet,
than
but to make a game like this on £1.3 million, you really do have to be picky about what you can and can't spend and what to focus on. And I'm not saying we got it right first time around either, but thankfully, due to the success of the game, Kickstarter, and everything that's gone since, it means we can keep going and improve and do better every time we release a future game, because we don't intend to repeat any mistakes. We always like to think we're smart enough to learn from them and listen to the feedback that's always given and say, hey, we'll revisit and rethink this stuff in future. So having those sequences like that, I think they have great production value.
I'm sure we talked about loads of things, possibly those things exactly, about putting them in, but then it's like, you know what, we're too focused on just getting the base stuff in there that we don't have time for that sort of thing.
It's never time scale, isn't it? There was tons and tons of stuff we could have added if we wanted to, but we just didn't have the time, and we wanted to get the game into people's hands rather than spend lots of time delaying it.
Now, I both appreciate and I'm concerned about some of the stuff they were saying. First off, I of course appreciate that they did indeed say, okay, we are trying to learn from everything that we've done, and we're trying to make sure that future outings are going to be more refined, and we're going to put more resources into future outings, and we listen to feedback and all that stuff. That's some good stuff to hear. You, of course, want to hear that all the time. But at the same time, I'm also concerned that, I don't know, this is something that comes up at earlier points. I didn't comment on this earlier, but this is also something that comes up in other parts of this video as well, that some parts were like, okay, we just didn't have enough time to do this, we didn't have the budget to do this. And now I'm not part of the development team, obviously. All the game development that I've done have always been solo projects, so I don't know what it's like to have a budget, to have a team, to have time constraints. But at least what I can at least echo what a lot of fans were saying, or a lot of people who backed the game, who I've heard from in forums, on Twitters, on my stream, on my YouTube, everywhere, where the sentiment that has gone around is, because this game is indie, and because it's been kickstarted, and because it blew past the Kickstarter goal, and because these guys know what they're doing, so they're not inexperienced, because of all these different factors, they should have been able to put as much time and effort into creating everything as was needed to make this game perfect. This is always the sentiment that I see when I talk to people. Like, okay, you didn't like this game, but can you tell me a bit more about why, or why were you disappointed, or something like that? Of course, if you are happy with the game, of course, none of that stuff is important, but at least the people that did not like it, I asked those, and they were always like, well, maybe, I thought that maybe if some of the parts of the game, like for example, Cardos, not Cardos cutting, but the Cardos sections, maybe if they aren't that great, why did they not put more effort into this? Why didn't they wait longer with the release until this stuff was perfect? And the thing is, I just don't know what's going on at Playtonic, so I can't really make any comment about that, because I don't know exactly what the budget was. Like I said, they said 1.3 billion pounds, but I don't know exactly how they allocated it throughout their development. I just know that there's similar games that also came out in that same year, that was made by an indie studio, that was also in development for way longer, that actually did spend a massive amount of time on polish instead of putting in more features. Like another game that I spent less time on than Yooka-Laylee, like to just beat the game, but that had like 5 times as much polish just because they spent so much time polishing. So it's something that I'm a very curious person. I always want to know everything. And this is something that just burns me up inside. It's like, we have 2 indie studios. I don't know, I think the other game, I'm not gonna mention it because everyone knows it already, the other indie 3D platformer that came out that year that is about head-based powers, and was not made by Nintendo. that one had a way longer development time. I think it had a lower budget, but it had a lot more polish. And so I asked myself, what is the difference here? Why are these two situations so different? Why could Playtonic not put in extra effort to polish the game? Like, I'm not trying to accuse. It sounds very accusatory, I know that. I'm not trying to sound accusatory. I'm genuinely just curious because I want to know the answer on what's going on. Because, like I said, I've only been working on solo projects for game development, and maybe someday I will be working with a team. I really want to someday work with a team on a video game, and this is something that intrigues me, because when I make a video game, I think to myself, if I see a part of a game that is not perfect to, or at least to my liking and satisfies me, then maybe I want to put more time into it. But maybe there are some reasons why I can't do that, and I want to be able to understand what is going on, so that either I don't run into these problems, that I don't have the time somehow, or that on the other hand I know how to counteract that. Once I think to myself, wait a second, we don't have enough time for this, maybe I get a better understanding of the situation that leads to something like this. Because I do know that a lot of other people also share a similar sentiment, because I know a lot of the negative reviews that did come in did indeed say that the game was rushed, or that not enough time was spent on this and this and that. So I am genuinely curious about that. But like I said, I don't work at Playtonic. I don't know what exactly the entire development cycle was like, but I do at least like that it was mentioned that, hey, we've learned from all the stuff that's going on, and I know they've also increased increased the team like by a lot. I think they have like 3 times as many people now than they did when they started working. So here's to hoping that also for the next game, now that they have a lot more resources, like human resources, hopefully financial resources as well, they are able to say, okay, we can put more time and effort into polishing everything, so that maybe something like the Kato sections can be perfect immediately and we don't have to patch it better later. Let's continue.
Another feature.
Potentially, there's stuff we could have moved to lifecycle management on the game as well, including where I'm stood right now. Rextro's arcade games could have been, perhaps we should have shipped without them and had the Rextro arcade game pack come later, and that would have saved some money from the earlier budget to then spend on other things, such as what we were just talking about, those types of cutscenes.
That was another thing we talked about. Sorry.
But I do want to mention that I don't think cutting out content for later, if it's an integral, like if it's like extraneous parts somewhere on the outside, is usually not a good thing. How would I even start that sentence? What I was trying to say is, Rextro's arcades are 2 pages in each world, and there's a coin. Is it a coin? That you require to even start it. So it's an important part of pretty much every stage that there is a collectible for Rextro Arcade, and then you do get 2 pages from it. So if you cut that, the question is, what do you put there instead? So I don't think that just cutting it would have been just something that you could do, because it is so important to all of these stages. But if it's something like, if it's some dingle-dongles that are like completely extraneous and don't really matter to anything, like for example, there is in Ivory Towers, there are some Rextro arcades that you can play. Maybe if you can say, okay, maybe we don't need those, because they don't give pages. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to unlock them. You just go there and play some mini games. If those weren't there, really wouldn't have mattered too much. So yeah, maybe those, for example, like if we do want to cut stuff out, that's something that you could have cut out. I mean, I've played through the game like 50 times or whatever. I mean, I'm speedrunning, so they weren't full playthroughs. I've only done like 3 or 4 full playthroughs of the game. No, I've done also like 10, because I've done 100-page speedruns and 100% speedruns, whatever. As I was trying to say is, I haven't actually played the Ivory Towers arcade Rextro games, to be honest, because I don't actually like Rextro arcade games that much, but that's just me. I know other people have maybe played them more. But anyway, like I was saying, if we're gonna cut stuff out, maybe the Rextro arcades in Ivory Towers would have been a place, not the ones on the stage. Let's go.
Hey, I'm just saying that there's always lots of different pros and cons and and ahhing over what to do, and we just need to keep giving ourselves the time to get a second crack at the whip and do better again in future. I think that's something I really like about game development, is you want to come into it with the mindset of you never ever going to peak until literally maybe you grow very, very old and your heart start beating, but you should end your career at the peak of your game making powers. Which is kind of sad when you talk about it in terms of human condition and life and death in that book.
Of course, he's a lot more experience than I have at game development by like 20, 30 years or whatever. But at least I'm not gonna say this is wrong, this is right. But to me personally, I would like to at least go into development thinking that what I can deliver is an absolutely amazing experience. Maybe not the best experience that I can, that is possibly possible. Like, of course, nothing is perfect. Even the, in my opinion, best game ever made, Banjo-Kazooie, has flaws here and there, but at least I think just mindset-wise, to me personally, this is something personal. To me, at least personally, I think that when I make a video game, I want to at least go in with the mindset that I'm trying at least to make it as perfect as possible. Just a little quip on the side.
You know, we're not sportsmen, we don't peak in our 20s or something. But game developers, yeah, want to go on and carry on improving all forever.
Oh no.
Now you've got to go see trials. Wouldn't the fast travel option or a map, like in Mario Odyssey, been really useful around now? I'm going to say yes.
Why don't you go and get the...
I have to say, just in general, having some sort of map. I mean, when you think about similar games like this, of course, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Dungeon 64, those kinds of games. I mean, the other indie game that came out that same year was based on hand-powered abilities and wasn't made by Nintendo and was an indie game or whatever. That game also didn't have a map, but I think it is something to consider that people who played this game did get lost in some of the stages a little bit. I'm not gonna say put in a map, but I do think that maybe there is some merit to having some sort of system, even if it's just something visual, that gives you a better indication of where you are in relation to the rest of the stage. Maybe it's just something as simple as when you, like, no matter where you are in the stage, you can always look towards the center of the stage, and there's some really big building that you can see, and you can also see what side of that building you're on, and that would help you realizing, like, oh, I'm in the east wing of the stage on this and this point, and this is where all the rest of the stuff is in the stage. I think in general this stage is alright in that regards because it's so open that you can kind of see all the rest. But at the same time, for example, if you look over towards Rampo, there's this like really huge rock formation and then a tree next to it that blocks your view from pretty much that entire area over there. So maybe that is it. So maybe something to consider like that. I wouldn't say it's neither good nor bad. We certainly don't need a map, but there's something hidden there. There is something there to consider.
Quill that everybody loves.
Yeah,
Oh, sure.
everyone's favourite quill.
Yeah,
The last
who put
quill.
that there?
We don't know, someone
We worked it out,
pulled
didn't
the
we? Who was it in the end?
I think it was Kev.
Kev put the horrible quill down.
Is that right?
Oh,
sorry.
amateur hour.
I thought that's where Kev put it.
I don't know if I'm remembering wrong though, I'm pretty sure it said Kev Bayless.
I think Kev did put that one then. Kevin Steve,
Kev.
when they got to put down some quills, they're really old school gamers and they used to love knowing they'd inflict pain on everyone who bought the game in some way. I mean, Kev worked on Battletoads, say no more. So yeah, we could call this quill the Battletoad quill. I think it's down there, isn't it?
Try again.
Sure, you can do it. Hey.
Okay, so of course this is
Hooray.
easily the most infamous quill in the entire game. That everyone who plays this game knows about this quill and is angry at this quill. And I find it interesting that the idea behind this quill, I don't like, Kevin isn't there, so he's not saying exactly what the idea was, but according to his fellow game developers, the idea was basically, hey, you know what? Let's just put this in there because it's hard to find and people are gonna have a hard time finding it and we like torturing people and stuff. I don't think that's why this quill's there at all. I just think in general, we just wanted to hide some stuff. And where we're gonna hide stuff? Well, here's some place where we can hide stuff, so let's put something there. Let's put a quill there. Now, this is what I said earlier when I wanted to talk a bit more about collectibles and about the outer ring of the arena of the stage and why this is so bad. The thing is, I said earlier that players, I've seen players, and I've done this myself as well, you start up the fly and you circle the outer edge of the entire level where you have these like rock formations. Like the entire stage is surrounded by these rock formations. Now there's no reason actually to walk around these rock formations. They're not really part of the stage. There's nothing on these rock formations, but it's because of quills like this. It's because of quills like this where you think to yourself, oh my god, these quills could be anywhere. Maybe they are off stage somewhere. Maybe there's a hidden cave or whatever below the stage where you have to like circle around the stage or whatever. Like people have the craziest ideas where quills could be hidden because of quills like this. Usually when you play similar games, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Donkey 64, blah, the main collectible, this is the main collectible in this game, the quills, which is either the notes or the bananas, the regular bananas, they are usually not really hidden in that sense. Like when you just walk through the stage, you go from point A to point B, and you just look around, you will see pretty much all of them. You will see pretty much all of the main collectibles just walking through the stage and keeping your eyes open while looking around. Maybe you need to stand still at some point, go into first person mode or whatever, and then like look around some other places. But usually you see all the stuff. And this is also serving a different idea in game design and level design, where, of course, like I said, also towards the very start of this, usually as a player, you kind of want to go to places where there's collectibles. If you see a collectible somewhere, let's say you see a string of collectibles, you kind of feel like you want to collect that string of collectibles. You kind of want to follow it. Like, let's imagine you're just in a completely white, empty space where there's nothing anywhere, but there's a string of collectibles. Everyone is going to walk towards that string of collectibles and is just going to collect all of them. Collectibles glue your eyes to them if there's nothing else around that is special, and they make you want to go there, and they make you want to do the gameplay that is associated with collecting them. And because of that, the main collectible is usually used in Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and DK64 to guide the player around the stage. If you imagine the stage is like a theme park that has all of these different attractions, imagine you come into the theme park and you can't really tell where you want to go first. Oh, do you want to go on the roller coaster first, or do you want to go into the haunted house first? You don't know. And you kind of feel like you want to go everywhere at some point, but you kind of want to feel like, oh, I've been everywhere, I've done everything, I've been to all the shops that are here. I kind of want to feel like once I leave the theme park, I want to feel like I've been everywhere, I've done everything. You don't want to leave the theme park and think to yourself, oh god, what if there was something I didn't do? Oh no. And stages are very similar to this in that regard as well. When you leave the stage, you want to think to yourself, or at least after the expansion, you want to think to yourself, I've done everything, I've completed the stage. I have done everything there is to do, I've experienced all the stage has to offer. That is what players think when they go into a stage like this and they play through the stage. They want to reach the point where they think to themselves, I've done everything. And the main collectible is absolutely vital in that regard, because the main collectible guides you around the stage and makes sure that you see everything the stage has to offer. And at the same time, once you collected every single collectible, you know, I've done everything, I'm done with the stage. I can leave the stage now without feeling bad. I can leave the stage without any hard feelings, without feeling like, oh, I've missed something. And then you look at collectibles like this, and this feels like in that theme park, there's like some off-road area at the edge of a theme park where behind some broken car that doesn't even belong to the theme park that someone just put there and forgot. If you look behind the steering wheel, there's a collectible there. I mean, it's an experience finding it, but is it really part of the attraction? Is it really part of the theme park? Do you feel like, oh, I really needed to find that collectible behind the steering wheel of that destroyed car in the off-road section that's not even part of the park to have experienced everything a theme park has to offer? You wouldn't think that to yourself. I mean, maybe once you find that, you're like, oh my god, that's an amazing experience that I found something in this area. But conversely, think about it this way. if you go through this theme park and you know there's 200 collectibles in this theme park, I want to collect all of them so that I know I've done everything, and you're missing like one, it becomes frustrating because you might think to yourself, wait a second, if I'm missing a collectible, maybe there's some sort of gameplay thing, maybe there's something that I've missed in this stage or in this theme park, or if I leave the theme park now, maybe I did miss something. Maybe there was an attraction that I missed. Maybe not something big, but maybe something small. Maybe there was a shop that I missed where I could have bought some balloon animals in the shape of my favorite pet. Maybe I missed that shop because I miss a quill. I miss a collectible. So maybe I did miss that pet shop. Maybe I did miss that pet shop. Who knows? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't know. And this is the problem that you run into when you place collectibles like that. They don't really guide you around the stage, and finding them doesn't really add too much, but knowing that you're missing it can add so many problems and so much frustration that you think to yourself, why could this not have been a different collectible? Why could this not have been a secret collectible, something like a pirate treasure, or maybe some other collectible that even if it just unlocks like concept art, like I always joke saying like concept arts might as well be nothing, but you know, they're still better than nothing. Concept art is still better than nothing, and if you find that down there and it's just a collectible that unlocks some concept art somewhere, you know, it's at least better than nothing. And at the same time, if you don't find it, you can just tell yourself, well, it's a secret collectible. I don't really need secret collectibles. If I've got all the quills, I have seen all the attractions. Because at least you can, or at least the idea is you trust the level designer to put the main collectibles around the stage in such a way that once you've collected all of them, you've seen all the attractions, you've done everything, you've experienced everything there is to experience, so then you can leave the stage and go to the next stage. But if you really want to dig down, that's where secret collectibles come in. Secret collectibles basically say like, hey, you don't need to collect me, but if you want to collect me, you can do that. You can go do that, but if you don't want to, you can go to the next stage. This is the problem that you have with quills like this, and coming back to something I said earlier as well, quills like this also make players think that maybe there's some really crazy spots around the outer side of the stage where there's quills hidden. And what happens? People use the fly, people either, or they don't use the fly and they just run around the outer circle of the stage, all of these rock formations that aren't even part of the stage. The rock formations have no significance other than they're just the edge of the stage, and yet people spend so much time. I spent like an hour just walking around the rock formations trying to look for a quill because I thought to myself, oh my god, if there's a quill in this spot, and I think I've seen some other quills around similar rock formations, then maybe there are quills there. Maybe there are quills there. I don't know. Maybe they're hidden somewhere around these rock formations, and you just go around trying to look for them, and it gets so frustrating. And I really hope that they learn from this, that something like this should not be a main collectible because of all of the problems that I just described that it creates in people. If it's a secret, you can still have this collectible, just make it a secret collectible, because then the stuff that you can gain from finding such collectible is still pretty much the same. You still find it and think to yourself, oh nice, I found something secret that maybe not everyone found. Yeah, but on the flip side, if you don't find it, totally fine. Totally fine, doesn't matter, you can continue on and you won't feel bad about it. And if you do want to find it, at least it's a secret, and if you can't find it for a while, it's a secret. So you don't feel that bad about not finding it, right? So that's that. I can rant about this a lot longer, but I really hope they learn from this, and in future they will be able to use main collectibles more like an invisible, or not invisible, but as some sort of guiding hand that guides you from attraction to attraction around the stage instead of being a hunt for them. So let's continue.
Now what do you do?
Now how do I get out of here? I guess I go
You
around.
jump around corners.
Easy.
Good
Pure
jumping.
evil.
Yeah,
Would
stay in
you
there.
consider that something that you would avoid doing again, or do you
I think so. I think it's a
Yeah.
bit too trollish in a way.
Yeah.
And they didn't know that. That's
You know
good.
what, since this game originally came out, Mario Odyssey turned up, and I think that it's got so many good lessons in that game on it to learn from.
Yeah, but at the same time, like,
practice.
that's a big team, with a lot of time to make
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
big budget and everything. So much of this in the game was down to
Now, I do need to say this. I don't know if he was talking specifically about that quill and that I just mentioned, but of course, budget shouldn't really change the way your budget shouldn't change your philosophy on placing collectibles. But I don't know if what he just said was about that, so I don't know.
the budget and time frame, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think with Kickstarter campaigns, I feel like people can make the mistake of, say, you see a Kickstarter campaign that completely exceeds its initial goal. I think sometimes people forget that the stretch goals, is stuff that actually needs funding, and stuff after the original funding goal isn't just fair cash. Like, it's got to be spent on something. So I just think there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And
yeah, I think also, so we said like, we'll do this and that, and we'll do all these extra things, but you don't really know if they're going to work out. But when you say that you're going to do them, you kind of have to do them. But maybe there are things that we promised we would do, and then it's like actually, if we hadn't promised this, would we consider it good enough to include? I don't know. I can't really think of any offhand, but
Yeah.
maybe like the quiz, for example.
Yeah.
So say we do that, okay, so let's just put it in somehow. But that was something where maybe we would have gone, you know what, let's spend more time improving just the levels rather than, I don't know.
Yeah, and when we have time
Good
to
that they
go back and
mentioned
do a
the
quiz,
quiz.
we go through a quiz that had a bit more investment put into it. I like the fact that the quiz is actually based and the questions and answers get a bit personalised to your current save game data. I think that was a nice touch.
I don't know about you, but for now, I think like the right way to do a Kickstarter is to not put any stretch goals and just go any extra money, we'll just keep improving it.
Yeah. Again, I think
I do like that
about
sentiment,
learning from
actually.
Mistakes, looking at feedback, good and positive, and knowing how to do things differently.
I'm not sure. Oh,
skills.
Nice.
Something I want to just very quickly mention. We saw him twirl off into the air, and then from the twirl did a jump in midair and then a double jump. Now this is of course an intended mechanic that you can twirl off the stage and then still jump, because this is also something you can do at Donkey Kong Country, where you could roll off a ledge and then still do a regular jump. So of course this had to be designed and put into the game and developed and everything, but I just like seeing game developers actually use some of the deeper game mechanics, if you can call it that. But yeah.
Bob Heinrich Jr. from Facebook asked, did you have any other plans with a big cloud affecting the weather and different things you could do in the world other than cloud races?
I think we wanted Nimbo to have a much wider effect on multiple challenges by being able to get water into level, freeze water, create new jump heights and distances, etc.
Like that. I like that.
We just run out of time to do it justice, in all honesty. I really would like to have done more with Nimbo on this world. Missed opportunity there, I'll admit. I don't think we had enough time to spend on the minecart gameplay enough, because we were never sure about giving him speed up, break mechanics and shooting. It's hard because he's always moving and goes around the tracks in 3D. It would be really difficult for us to figure out.
Yeah, I would definitely say the karting sections are divisive. Like, people either love them or
Yeah.
don't.
I think there's an expectation that comes with minecart levels of what they are and what they're going to be. I don't think we quite aligned with that. And we probably tried to complicate things too much, and it's one of those areas where you just think, no, just do great, core, fun gameplay, rather than try and make it too mechanically new or different. Again,
That is exactly what I was gonna say.
lesson learned.
This was probably another one where it was like, we said we do it in the Kickstarter, it wasn't working out, we should have, well, any other time we would have maybe cut it and focused more on other stuff and made like other things more polished, rather than just being spread thin over this.
Yeah, it's a brave
Yes.
thing to go ahead and promise things outright, but it can backfire. And it's also really difficult to let go of something and admit defeat on something too.
I like everything that's being talked about here, because this is exactly the sentiment that people had towards Carter sections, and why people didn't like the Carter sections that much. And it's really good that this was actually understood by the developers. Like, yeah, sorry guys, it happened. I'm sorry. So hopefully, like I said, they did learn from this. So hopefully they'll in the future be able to also apply everything that they've learned from this and make better stuff. Yay!
So whose burp is that?
I don't know. I remember standing in front of a mic and gulping down a protein shake, and I don't think it got used in the end. I think Dan went with his own pig noises. No.
One thing I want to touch on before I get to the end of this, which is coming up quite soon. Something that becomes very apparent in this video series, and something that I think also came through when they were making this game, is that these developers are indeed very passionate about what they do, and they honestly want to make amazing experiences. Because this is, I mean, this sounds like, of course they do. Why wouldn't they? Usually when you look at modern games nowadays, I don't want to be like, well, modern games are shit and the old games are all the greatest. But I do see at least the sentiment come up a lot more often that, well, creating games is a job now, and you know how a lot of people hate their jobs. Well, why isn't that not to say that maybe for some big companies, there's also a lot of game developers who hate their job because you know it's like a job and they don't want to do it. Because maybe as kids they really wanted to make games, and then maybe they studied some stuff for it. Maybe they made their own games, and then they got into game development, and then they got signed by big companies. But then once they got signed, they realized, oh no, there's like company life to take into consideration now, and being just a tiny cog in a giant machine maybe isn't exactly what I wanted, but it makes good money, and I need to feed my family or whatever. And so maybe the passion sort of gets lost along the way for some of these people. Or maybe you can't, or maybe you have a lot of passion, but you can't do the stuff that you want to do. You can't put that into the game because maybe some higher ups tell you no, or you have a publisher who says no, we can't sell that, or some stuff, or some other reason. But at least with Playtonic Games and other similar indie developers, it's at least nice to know that you still have the sentiment going around that, hey, we love making games and we want to make a game that we enjoy, that you enjoy, and that's just a blast to play. And I think that's very important to note that these people are very passionate. And I also want to take this moment to thank you guys, Playtonic, for making this video series to give us a bit more of an insight into what is going on the developer side of this. Let's continue.
Yeah, I meant it as a genuine true story. I'm a bit gutted. I think I even like went home and said to my wife, "Oh, this is great. I'm gonna be a pig."
I have a question for you actually. If you could change one thing about this level, what would it be?
That would have given the task of designing it to someone other than you.
Oh.
No. One thing, if I could change one thing about it, I think it's the use of Nimble, as I alluded to earlier. I'd love to have had the changes and the impact he makes on the level be more integral. Nimble, yeah, to a lot of other areas as well as just the riverbed and a lot of the challenges.
I agree wholeheartedly.
We should have built that in as one of the key features to level, I feel.
That would be nice.
Yeah, and again, the expansion would have had a lot more repercussion and wow than it perhaps ended up with.
Yeah, that's what
I
I'm
feel like
saying.
we've got unfinished business with 3D platformers. I think we could do a really good second go at it.
I do too.
So yeah, that was that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have anything to add, of course, write me a comment below. So yeah, that was that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you guys next time.